The Great War left the whole world rattled, but the generation that had just entered adulthood was disproportionately affected by the war, both physically and psychologically. Soldiers returned home exhibiting a new type of war wound called shell shock. Symptoms included paralysis, amnesia, insomnia, inability to speak, and tremors, even in those who had not experienced physical injury. The war left them wondering, why? Why had they fought? Had their sacrifices achieved anything? What was the point of it all? And as empires fell and new regimes rose to power, they were also forced to contend with the question, now what? Today, we'll be focusing on the interwar period, the period of time between the First and Second World Wars. Today's guiding questions are, what features characterized different art movements during the interwar period? What was the relationship between art, anti-colonialism, and nationalism during the interwar period? How was science impacted by the rise of nationalism in Japan and Germany? And how did scientific advancements during the interwar period affect everyday life? As we go, keep in mind the big picture question. What factors shaped the development of the arts and sciences during the interwar period? Coined by Gertrude Stein, the Lost Generation became the name for the generation that entered adulthood during the Great War. Stein originally used the term to describe her friends, a cohort of artists and writers like Ernest Hemingway, Pablo Picasso, Marie Laurencin, and Zelda and F. Scott Fitzgerald, who all spent time living in Paris. The Lost Generation used art and literature to come to terms with the war and its aftermath. They focused on themes like disillusionment, loss of identity, and uncertainty about the future. But they also embraced a life's too short attitude. In other words, they liked to party. Stein's home was used as a gathering place for artists, writers, and intellectuals. Her personal art collection was one of the first great modern art collections in the world. Stein's collection was avant-garde, a French term that roughly translates to ahead of its time, used to describe works that are new, unusual, or experimental. Several different art movements, including Cubism and Surrealism, were considered avant-garde. In Cubism, subjects are broken up and reassembled in an abstract form, forcing the viewer to interact with the subject from multiple perspectives. As academics and psychologists like Freud tried to better understand the subconscious and unravel the causes of shell shock, Surrealism emerged as an artistic and cultural movement that sought to expose and express the subconscious. Surrealist artists used art to push the boundaries of reality, logic, and the unexpected. As you can see in Otto Dix's Stormtroopers Advancing Under Gas, German art was also heavily influenced by war. Like Stein's Lost Generation, young adults in Germany and elsewhere were struggling to find their place in the world. Arguably the most famous interwar artistic style was Art Deco, an artistic movement characterized by its use of geometric shapes and patterns, bold colors, and intricate details. Art Deco influenced everything from architecture and fashion to everyday objects like radios. Let's pause and answer the first guiding question by completing the chart in your lesson PDF. What features characterized different art movements during the interwar period? These art movements spread around the globe, but not all artists wanted to imitate Western art. Many artists traveled to Paris to study and, after returning home, blended modern and traditional art forms to express nationalist, anti-colonial, and revolutionary ideas. For example, Brazilian artists used European techniques and traditional materials to forge their own unique Brazilian styles. These were showcased as part of Brazil's celebration of 100 years of independence in 1922. Like Paris, Mexico's art scene was home to an international cohort of intellectuals and artists, many of whom had fled political instability and revolution in Latin America. This mural by Diego Rivera is an example of Mexican muralism, an artistic movement funded by the government to promote nationalism and celebrate Mexico's pre-colonial heritage. It depicts the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan before the arrival of Europeans. Frida Kahlo, another influential Mexican artist, blended surrealism, realism, and folk art and drew inspiration from Mexico's history and natural beauty. In the United States, the Great War sparked the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural and intellectual movement that celebrated African American art, literature, and music, especially jazz. Like the artistic movements in Brazil and Mexico, the Harlem Renaissance touched on themes like freedom, heritage, and tradition. In Japan, art was used to promote nationalism and modernism. This is reflected in works like Tea Room, which shows two modern women working in a very traditional Japanese space. However, as Japanese artists became increasingly nationalistic, the government imprisoned some artists for their ideologically dangerous work. Dadaism, an artistic movement that rejected logic and reason, as well as capitalism and consumerism, is perhaps the most iconic German art form from this period and helped inspire surrealism. Dada was not restricted to a single art form and included the use of collage and assemblage, which used found objects to create three-dimensional images, sculptures, and costumes. Things changed when the Nazi Party came to power in 1933. The term degenerate art was used by the Nazis to demean modern art movements that were seen as a threat to their authority. In 1937, the Nazis held 2 exhibitions of confiscated degenerate art, accompanied by slogans like "Madness becomes method" and "Nature is seen by sick minds," to turn the public against modern art. Let's pause and answer the second guiding question by completing the chart in your PDF. What was the relationship between art, anticolonialism, and nationalism during the interwar period? Nationalism also affected scientific development. After Japan discovered America's War Plan Orange, the American military's strategic plan for possible war with Japan, Japan invested in technologies like carrier aviation. In Nazi Germany, Jews were banned from positions teaching and researching at German universities. Consequently, theoretical physicist Albert Einstein, who had been in the United States when Hitler came to power, was unable to return home. To help other Jewish academics escape Nazi Germany, the Academic Assistance Council was created in 1933. The organization, later renamed the Council for Assisting Refugee Academics, still exists. But the Nazis also embraced science when it served their goals. Eugenics, the pseudoscience that falsely claims intelligence is linked to genetics, was used to justify mass killing to create a more racially pure Germany in the 1930s. The victims, which included 5,000 children under 16, were killed using chemical weapons developed by Nazi-funded research and were a precursor to the Holocaust. Let's pause here and answer our third guiding question. How was science impacted by the rise of nationalism in Japan and Germany? But scientific development was not all doom and gloom during the interwar period. Research at Bell Labs, which focused on the recording and transmission of sound, resulted in innovations like movies with sound, like 1927's The Jazz Singer.
Wonderful pals are always hard to find. Some folks have one, some folks have none.
At home, electricity was becoming increasingly common, leading to a boom in household appliances. Initially luxury items, they eventually became part of everyday life. Automotive innovation also reshaped daily life. Automakers like Chrysler and Bugatti began to focus more on aesthetics. The growing popularity of automobiles led to investments in infrastructure like roads and bridges. Henry Ford's assembly line was adapted to mass-produce much more than cars, leading to increased consumption of other mass-produced goods. Aviation also had a moment during the interwar period, which we'll explore further in the lesson PDF. For now, let's pause here and respond to the last guiding question. How did scientific advancements during the interwar period affect everyday life? The legacy of the Great War touched every part of life, from art and music to civil rights and censorship. But as the world tried to move on, it couldn't escape the shadow of war, because history is everywhere.
Hey, hey.